Art, last week we were talking about the narrative breaking down a little bit. I wonder if that's sort of accelerated. The narrative was the stimulus was the bridge to the vaccine, and we're going to have a reopening story that happens with no lockdowns and maybe a vaccine widely available in the second quarter. Is that the problem we're having now, that narrative is breaking down, or is there something else happening?
Well, thank you for remembering it. We talked about the market and traders being a little too complacent about the fact that a vaccine would be nearby and bail everything out, and this is a concern that maybe that wasn't correct. Now, ordinarily, as I predicted in my pre-opening comments, the market was going to see a flush out of the nearby sell stops, which people have been surfing the trend of the market and protecting themselves with sell stops. We saw that flush out in the early sell-off. Right now, they're retesting those lows. For argument's sake, the Dow 26.8 to 26.850, somewhere around there. Ordinarily, what I would say to you, Bob, is that the next move would be, once that seems to hold, a little bit of a rally. But today, because Europe is center stage, we're going to go at about 11 o'clock to focus on Europe, ready for their 11:30 closing. So are there more rumors? Is it going to, I think the market overnight, when Macron announced he would give a national address at 8 p.m. Paris time, is when the market sold off the heaviest. There is speculation that he may even close the borders and do a complete lockdown for 2 or 3 or even a month, 2 or 3 weeks or even a month. So ordinarily that bounce is going to be held up as we watch what happens in Europe from 11 to 11:30.
Yeah, and I think the European close is 12:30 because of daylight savings time today. But let me we are concerned. The traders do seem very concerned about Europe because additional lockdowns. This wasn't part of the narrative, the scenario. The idea was we'd keep going on. We might have problems, but there wasn't going to be any lockdown. Is that a possibility in the United States? Or if we don't have a lockdown, maybe some alternative, I don't know what you call it, lockdown light or something like that. The market seemed very concerned about this lockdown narrative that's occurring over in Europe.
Yeah, well, you had had Scott Gottlieb on earlier, and he said the problem with the U.S. lockdown is there doesn't appear to be any public support for it, that people saw how bruised we got early on and what it did to the economy. And Bob, you're covering earnings all the time, and people won't give guidance because of what's happening with the virus. So that's going to be a problem. But I think the real problem here is what does happen in Europe. We're focused on France and Germany, but Spain and Italy and places like that may be about to go rampant. And that's why they're talking about maybe closing the borders down. The European Union is about to kind of secede from itself. And that, as you can see in the oil market and other places, is going to have a broad economic impact.
The message that we hear from the administration, from the president, from the Treasury Secretary, and from many Republicans in Congress is that there will not be another lockdown in this country. They are not effective, and the American people do not want them. And to your point, I think what Scott Gottlieb was trying to say is that even if you had some sort of lockdown or lockdown light, there's so much dissonance among people that they might not necessarily abide by those rules. So what does that tell us about the potential longevity of the virus and the impact that could have on the economy?
Well, I think the great concern is to see what happens in Europe. Are lockdowns or new lockdowns tolerated and complied with? And, Kayla, let me throw you a real wild card here. So far, the virus seems to be under control in Asia, particularly China. If we start to see a second wave pop up in Asia, Nelly, hold the boards, because we might see a much more global impact and a much more severe letdown in the market. So for now, the center of everybody's attention is Europe, and in the back of their mind, they're worried about Asia.
Art, in terms of policy response to all of this, Dudley's got a piece out this morning. It's entitled, "The Fed is Really Running Out of Firepower," and his point is that Powell's not bluffing when he leans on Congress to provide fiscal support, that even if the Fed did more, it probably wouldn't be that effective. I mean, how much does that light a fire under lawmakers whom we know now have not been able to put together a package pre-election?
Well, and Carl, you hit the problem right on the head here, in that the Fed can only provide money to make things available. They don't have many ways in which they can promote actual spending. That's up to the public, and the public would only do that at some government behest. Now, clearly, we're not going to see any cooperation going into the election. And my great concern is if the election is very close in several places, is basically contested. I mean, you can hear it on both sides. We've already gone through a President Trump whose election was discounted heavily by the other side. I think if it's a tight election and there are lawsuits, and we won't know for days who really is there, whoever wins will be discredited by the other side. People will assume the election might not be legitimate, and that could limit stimulus all the way through, because the assumption is after the election, they'll get together and say, okay, let's cooperate. We've got to get the economy moving, regardless of who's there. It may turn out not to be the case.
Art, let me ask you about the earnings situation. We're exactly halfway through third quarter earnings. They've been stellar. They've been beating expectations by a wide margins. Analysts have been way too conservative. The problem here is they're expecting great numbers out of the fourth quarter and then into the first quarter and the second quarter when the numbers really go up rather dramatically, because that's the narrative. The reopening story is going to happen. Is all of that now a little bit imperiled? And at this point, we have fairly high valuations for stocks already, expecting even higher ones. I'm wondering if that's what the market's really trying to deal with right now. We have UPS today not giving any guidance, saying they're great numbers, but they said we have no idea what's going to be happening for the next couple of quarters.
Well, again, that's something you and I discussed last week on CNBC, and that was that the earnings were not really going to move the market because people can't really buy into the earnings. Yes, you know what you earned and you know what you saw. There is no guidance. There has been no guidance. And to be able to come out with great numbers and say, well, I really don't know what that looks like for next year, that doesn't give any encouragement to anybody. So you've got all these problems. You've got election uncertainty. You've got no guidance from companies. And so much of it is based on what does the world look like with COVID breaking out. So we're going to be watching as we move toward the European close. But the game is certainly not here. It's elsewhere.
I wonder if you could put this into some historic context, Art. You've been around 55 years. I always turn to you for historic wisdom. Do you remember a time when there was so much macro uncertainty? I mean, not just the election, but high-priced stocks, the stimulus, the rollout, the what's going on with the election and the vaccine issues. Is there any other time you can remember when we've had this much macro uncertainty?
Well, thank you for reminding me how long I've been here. It's actually a little longer than that, but I came in swaddling clothes, so it was all right. The point is, yes, we've had periods of great uncertainty, but this one is almost global, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, and that is highly unusual. We've had things centered in Europe. We've had things centered in Asia. We've had things even centered here in the United States with broad uncertainty around. But I cannot think of one in which the entire global economy and global civilization, as it were, is so tied up. And I would tell you, keep a very wary eye on Asia. If there is a resurgence of the COVID virus in Asia, all bets are off.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.